Queen Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, the monarch who had defied expectations, led England into a golden age, and ruled unchallenged for nearly 45 years, was dying. The once vibrant ruler who had outwitted assassins, navigated treacherous political landscapes, and turned England into a formidable Protestant powerhouse now found herself utterly alone. Time, the one enemy she could not vanquish, had tightened its grip around her frail body. Her once fiery red hair had dulled to wisps of white. Her skin sagged beneath the weight of years, and her brilliant mind, once sharp enough to cut through conspiracies, had dimmed into confusion and grief. But Elizabeth refused to surrender easily, even to death itself. Queen Elizabeth I had ruled England for nearly half a century, ushering in an era of cultural brilliance, naval triumphs, and national identity. The defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588 had solidified England's status as a rising maritime power, and Elizabeth herself had become a near mythical figure, an unmarried queen who defied expectations and wielded absolute authority. Yet by the early 1600s, the Queen had grown weary. Her closest advisers, Francis Walsingham, William Cecil, Robert Dudley, were gone, leaving her surrounded by courtiers eager for power. The Tudor dynasty teetered on the brink of extinction. With no direct heir, England faced an uncertain future. As Elizabeth's health declined, whispers of Scotland's King James VI, the son of her executed cousin Mary, Queen of Scots, grew louder. Elizabeth's final years were marked by loneliness and grief. The execution of the Earl of Essex in 1601 had left her emotionally shattered. Once her favourite, Essex had attempted rebellion against her, forcing Elizabeth to sign his death warrant. It was a cruel irony. She, who had survived plots against her life, had sent a beloved companion to the scaffold. Her health deteriorated rapidly. Reports from her court describe her refusal to eat, her severe depression, and her strange insistence on standing for hours at a time. She rejected her physician's advice, seemingly knowing that no treatment could reverse the inevitable. Meanwhile, across England, the nobility prepared for her death. Politicians manoeuvred behind the scenes, fearing that without a smooth transition, civil war could erupt. The question of succession weighed heavily, as Elizabeth herself refused to name her replacement. For decades, Elizabeth had painted herself into legend, her face masked behind Venetian ceruse, the poisonous, lead-based makeup that lent her an ethereal pallor. But beauty had a price, to achieve her signature ghostly complexion. The process involved skin preparation. Her attendants cleansed her face before applying a base layer of ceruse. Layering the white makeup, the ceruse was painted onto her face and neck, creating an unnaturally pale look. Over time, she applied thicker layers to cover blemishes and scars. Queen Elizabeth I covered her scars primarily to conceal the disfigurement caused by smallpox, which she contracted in 1562, just 4 years into her reign. The disease left her with pockmarks and uneven skin, a stark contrast to the flawless image she had cultivated as England's sovereign. Her use of Venetian crews, a toxic lead-based makeup, was not merely a beauty choice. It was a mask of power. In an era where physical appearance was deeply tied to authority, Elizabeth's stark white complexion became a symbol of strength, control, and divine right. However, the very makeup that preserved her image slowly poisoned her, contributing to her declining health over the years too. Some sources suggest she may have used powders to set the ceruse, preventing smudging. She used cinnabar, a mercury-based pigment, to stain her lips and cheeks a deep red. After wearing the makeup for days, she used mercury to wipe it all off. The toxicity seeped into her veins, corroding flesh and vigour alike. Her teeth had blackened long ago, hollow remnants of unchecked decay, and abscesses festered in her mouth, their infection sinking deeper into her body. Was it lead poisoning? Was it pneumonia? Or had the relentless march of history simply come to claim its most stubborn ruler? Death did not strike in a single blow. It was cruelly patient. Her coronation ring, the symbol of her marriage to England itself, had grown into her flesh, a grotesque reminder of her unyielding loyalty. When her attendants finally removed it, the pain and sorrow were too much. Elizabeth, who had defied marriage, war, and treason, was succumbing, not to an assassin's blade or a political coup, but to time itself. The long, silent agony of a queen. The queen's decline was neither sudden nor merciful. Over the course of months she had grown increasingly frail, plagued by insomnia, melancholy, and a strange creeping paralysis that sapped her strength. She refused to rest, refused to be tended to, refused even to admit she was dying. Instead, she stood for hours at a time, unmoving, as if defying mortality through sheer force of will. She would not sit, she would not eat. Her ladies-in-waiting whispered among themselves, fearful of the skeletal figure before them, their queen transformed into a spectre of her former self. Elizabeth's paranoia had deepened in these last days, the weight of past betrayals pressing upon her mind. The execution of her beloved Robert Devereux, Earl of Essex, haunted her endlessly. The shadows of those who had once been her trusted advisers, William Cecil, Robert Dudley, Francis Walsingham, loomed over her, absent yet ever present. She stared unblinking at the walls of Richmond Palace, lost in memories too painful to escape, the haunting atmosphere of Richmond Palace. The walls of Richmond Palace, once filled with music, laughter, and the bustling energy of court life, had become a tomb. Silence smothered the air. Candles flickered, their wavering flames casting long shadows that twisted across the stone floors like grasping fingers. The Queen's attendants moved like spectres themselves, unsure whether they were serving a ruler or mourning a corpse that had not yet fallen. Elizabeth's refusal to name an heir only deepened the unease. The uncertainty surrounding England's future hovered like a spectre, chilling the bones of all who waited for her last breath. The final hours, a queen, transformed into a corpse before death. As her strength waned, Elizabeth's standing vigil became a grotesque spectacle. She had refused to lie down, fearing that if she did, she would never rise again. Days passed, and still she stood, her wasted frame barely supported by trembling limbs. At last exhaustion overwhelmed her, and her ladies convinced her to recline upon a pile of cushions, her final, reluctant surrender to the inevitable. She drifted into a death-like trance, barely speaking, barely breathing. The hush within the palace deepened as her attendants watched, waiting. She was alive, yet she was already gone. The moment of death. On March 24th, 1603, the Virgin Queen took her final breath. No grand proclamation marked the moment, only silence, deep and consuming. Those in attendance watched, frozen, as her skeletal frame lay motionless upon the cushions. Her eyes, once piercing, had dulled into a vacant stare. Outside, bells rang throughout London, echoing across the city. The Queen was dead. The Gloriana of England had fallen. Even in death, Elizabeth had not named her successor. The transition of power unfolded behind the scenes, a carefully orchestrated manoeuvre to secure King James VI of Scotland as England's next ruler. The Tudor dynasty had ended, swallowed by the inevitability of time. Elizabeth's corpse was swiftly embalmed, her features preserved to maintain the illusion of majesty even in death. When her funeral procession wound through the streets of London weeks later, thousands lined the roads to witness their fallen queen carried to her final resting place. Her white pall, adorned with golden embroidery, shimmered beneath the dim spring sun. Yet grief mingled with unease. The Virgin Queen had ruled without equal, and now she was gone. What lay ahead for England under a new dynasty, none could yet know. Elizabeth had defied marriage, defied foreign invaders, defied treachery, and for decades defied expectations. But in the end, she could not defy death. Even centuries later, her legacy lingers, a ruler whose reign shaped the very identity of England. Her name is whispered still, her story retold in echoes of gold and shadow. She may have died, but Gloriana would never truly fade. What happened to Queen Elizabeth's body after she died? Elizabeth did die, and before death crept upon her, she left strict and chilling instructions to her servants regarding what should happen to her body. She was repulsed by the grotesque tradition of endowment and embalming, the slicing open of flesh, the removal of the heart and insides, and the stuffing of the emptied cavity with pungent herbs and spices meant to mask the inevitable decay. This would not happen to her. She forbade it. Yet death is an unyielding force, and human hands are crueler still. Elizabeth's orders were ignored. The doctors defiled her corpse, carving into her cold flesh, disemboweling her, and violating the very vessel that had once housed her indomitable will. It was for the best, they claimed. Had they not done so, Elizabeth's body would have exploded, her flesh bursting apart, her coffin violently splintering as the gases within clawed for release. Still, the embalming did little to halt nature's insidious destruction. It merely delayed the horror. She was laid in state inside a lead-lined coffin in Richmond Palace, encircled by a sinister glow of burning tapers and flickering candlelight, their dying flames illuminating the silent, lifeless Queen before her last journey commenced. The Queen's final journey, a procession of death. The journey to Westminster Abbey began. Elizabeth's corpse was borne down the River Thames to the Palace of Whitehall. Her coffin, draped in suffocating black velvet, was closely watched by 6 solemn ladies, their faces etched with sorrow, or perhaps terror. As the coffin travelled by royal barge, the mourners whispered, the oars at every stroke did tears let fall. A nation wept, mourning the Queen who had ruled them with a ruthless hand yet carried them into glory. Then it happened. The embalming had slowed the decay but not stopped it. The gases, relentless and foul, pressured the insides of the Queen's corpse. The wood groaned, then splintered. A crack, deep and jagged, split open the coffin's surface, a violent rupture spreading like decay itself as her body, though cloaked in its cerecloth meant to preserve her remains, was no longer whole. The dead Queen had betrayed her coffin, yet the grim march pressed on. On April 28th, a full month after death had claimed her, Elizabeth's remains were borne in a grand procession to Westminster Abbey. The streets were suffocated with thousands of mourners, a writhing mass of bodies, all desperate to glimpse the final passage of their monarch. It was recorded. The city of Westminster was surcharged with a multitude of all sorts of people in their streets, houses, roofs and gutters, who came to see the obsequies. There was such a general sighing, groaning and weeping as had not been seen or known in the memory of man. Elizabeth's regal yet haunting burial. Her coffin was lavishly decorated, concealing the rotting husk within. Resting atop was an effigy of Elizabeth, a waxen wood spectre garbed in her Parliament robes, adorned with her crown, clutching a sceptre in her lifeless hand. For many in London, this was the first time they had truly seen their Queen. Her coffin, pulled by 4 solemn horses, entered Westminster Abbey, where Dean Andrews conducted the funeral rites. The Queen was then taken to the Henry VII Lady Chapel, built by her grandfather, Henry VII, as a mausoleum for the great and the damned. At first, Elizabeth was entombed alongside her grandfather, her monstrous father, Henry VIII, and her grandmother, Elizabeth of York. But in 1607 she was exhumed, her corpse displaced, then forced upon her half-sister, Queen Mary I, Bloody Mary, Elizabeth's final insult to her Catholic sister. Records state that 46 shillings and 4 pence were paid for the removal of her body, to place her atop Mary so that she would forever rest above her sibling, dominating her even in death. James I, the new king, had commissioned a grand tomb, costing nearly £1,500. Elizabeth's final likeness, the cold, lifeless image of her last years, was sculpted, regal yet spectral, the 19th century break-in, the unearthing of Queen Elizabeth's coffin. During the 19th century, the tomb of Queen Elizabeth I was broken into, and what was found within was unsettling. In 1880, a book was published by Arthur Stanley, the Dean of Westminster Abbey, documenting his exploration of the royal vaults. His descent into the crypt was sanctioned by Queen Victoria, granting him special access to examine the burials of past monarchs. But beneath the grandeur of the Abbey, time had been cruel. Stanley was specifically searching for the coffin of King James I, Elizabeth's successor. Instead, he stumbled into a chamber of decay, where the dead had begun to collapse into ruin. He explored an underground aisle beneath Elizabeth's tomb, where the air was thick with dust, rot and silence. Then, an opening in the walls, a narrow wound in the stone. He crept through, lantern flickering, pressing himself into the darkness of a burial vault. Inside were 2 coffins stacked atop one another, like a grotesque embrace in death. They belonged to Elizabeth I and her sister Mary. Stanley went in closer for a look and documented what he saw. The excavations had almost torn open the walls, dragging away parts of the vault along with the decaying lid of Elizabeth's coffin. It was instantly evident that only 2 bodies lay within. One, larger, its shape more distinct. Mary, Queen of Scots. Elizabeth rested upon her as though even in death she refused to release her claim over her throne. But there was disorder and decay. The wood had crumbled, exposing the inner layers of Elizabeth's coffin. The centering case had collapsed, its remains scattered over where the Queen's head once lay. No coffin plate could be discovered, but something eerie remained. Through the dim light, Stanley spotted a fragment of the lid, slightly carved. The Tudor badge, a full double rose, deeply but simply engraved, its edges splintered, its meaning haunting. Further searching revealed more, the august initials E.R. and below, a date carved in time like a death knell, 1603. Even the coffin itself bore scars of age and ruin. The casing, once an inch-thick elm, had been stripped bare. The ornamental lid, made of fine oak, half an inch thick, lay atop the elm cover like a forgotten relic. The whole thing had once been covered with red silk velvet. Much of it remained, clinging desperately to the wood, as though it refused to abandon the Queen even as rot devoured her tomb. The sight was haunting. 2 Tudor sisters forever entombed, forever pressed into one another by the weight of history. One had reigned in fire and violence, the other had ruled in terror and blood. Now, in death, they had no choice but to remain together. The vault was then immediately closed. Still, to this day, this remains the final time that anyone has cast eyes upon the coffin of Queen Elizabeth I. And it is the truest account of the state that it was in. It is said that time has not been kind, that her resting place has suffered ruin, destruction, damage, or decay in the centuries following her death. Yet she remains sealed within the stone, stacked above her sister, locked beneath the weight of history's bones, buried beneath the great Tudor tomb, lost, unseen, rotting and waiting. And beneath her, Mary still remains, trapped under Elizabeth's decayed form, forever smothered by her sister's corpse.